Thank you very much, Kate. I'd like to acknowledge Barry Winmar and that we're on Wajak Noongar Budja, and in acknowledging it, I always like to say that we have to look at the effects of colonisation and what it's done. These aren't Aboriginal problems, they're problems of colonisation, and we would be the same if we had had that kind of history. I'm really excited about The Voice because I have such fantastic evidence that it's going to make such a huge difference to the outcomes of Aboriginal people. And the only thing that pisses me off is that the Yes campaign isn't using the examples widely enough. So I hope you can go forth and multiply and give all these good examples to everybody. But I just want to start by acknowledging that Thomas has said how detrimental previous policies have been to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And there are two huge reasons for that. One is that they implement things like the Northern Territory intervention, which are hugely costly, aimed at reducing child sexual abuse for the Little Children Are Sacred report. And do you know what happened for every year after that? Child sexual abuse increased in the Northern Territory. Huge, no voice in that at all, took away people's self-esteem as well as actually led to more problematic outcomes. The other huge reason that they've had such a negative impact is there have been outstanding, and ATSIC of course is one of the best examples, outstanding Aboriginal-led programs. But the one that's closest to my heart and that I'm most anguished about because of the recent kerfuffles and disasters about juvenile detention is that there were Aboriginal-controlled, community-controlled family and child services across the nation, 75 of them. They were fantastic. And you may remember that the actual Year 12 retention rates were going up. In 2014-15, Abbott, Turnbull, Scullion and Birmingham defunded these centres. And now they're wondering why there are so many Aboriginal kids going off the rails in some of these communities. Well, I can tell you why. There's a pathway that goes directly from birth, FASD, alcohol-related brain damage, right through to detention, to bad behaviour in detention. To me, this was the most, that and ATSIC, the most agonising negative decisions that that government has made. I won't even go into things like robo-debt or other things. But you know, mainstream governments have failed Aboriginal people from before birth right through to death, and I think that's terribly important to remember. And the reason why they fail so expensively is they don't have an Aboriginal voice. And I've now been researching, I'm very old, and I've been researching this for over 40 years with the Aboriginal leaders that Kate referred to. When I set up the institute, I went to the Aboriginal community and I said, we're not a service provider, we're a research organisation, what do you want us to be for you? And they said, we want you to be our mother. Well, a mother grows up the confidence and competence and the financial capacity of her children so that they can cope in a modern world that's really challenging. And though all of these incredible Aboriginal researchers are now leading across the country, and I'm just like a little mother hen, I guess. But the examples that I want to give you and that I want you to take away are to do with COVID, Aboriginal birthing and youth justice. And they are so exciting. And this is why a voice is going to make such a difference. And people say, oh, it mightn't make a difference. All this money's been spent before. It's no, you know, Aboriginal people being blamed for the fact that they didn't respond to mainstream services. But the COVID response was absolutely amazing. We've got an extraordinary group, a network of Aboriginal-controlled health organisations and other social organisations across the country, in spite of ATSIC being disbanded. They're underfunded, they're not valued, they are fantastic. The network is there. Now, during COVID, we would have anticipated, because of the high risks of Aboriginal people, chronic disease, living, overcrowded conditions, etc. And most Aboriginal people actually live in cities. They don't live in remote communities. Only 18% live in remote communities. So they were high risk. What happened? Well, in the first 18 to 20 months of the pandemic, Aboriginal people had 6 times fewer cases than non-Indigenous people did. How did they do it? They had a voice. They had a voice in NACCHO, they had a voice at all of the state and territory organisations, right down to communities. They lobbied to close remote communities, but that meant they had to get all of that capacity to support those people so they could feed them, give them medical care. The the COVID information that was put out on social media by Aboriginal population was absolutely wonderful and hilarious, much better than any of the ads we did, even though I actually did the ads for Western Australia. The Aboriginal ones were wonderful and they were so effective. They had droplets being spewed over people and, you know, you could get in a minute why you had to wear a mask, why you had to socially isolate. We should have used them. So there were no cases after the Black Lives Matter marches. There was one person in intensive care and no deaths. This is the best in the world, the best in the world. And is everyone knowing about this and saying, oh, aren't Aboriginal people wonderful because they can control their... It was very difficult for us to get that story out into the media. And I say to the media, you don't like good stories about Aboriginal people. And there are so many. So that's a great one. Now, of course, this came to an end when they lost their voice, when Scott Morrison stuffed up the vaccine rollout and they closed the communities too soon, then we did get cases. But still, the Aboriginal response to the pandemic was the best in the world, and it is the best example of why a voice is going to make such difference, and I'm so excited about that. The next one is Aboriginal birthing, and this is something that's relatively sort of new, I thought. I pride myself on knowing everything about Aboriginal statistics, and I was blown away. We had a conference here in early May, 250 Aboriginal women from across the country talking about the programs that they had been developing for bringing back grandmother's way of birthing on country. But it's not what you would think, oh, we're going to go and have a birth under a tree and there won't be any other help, and even if you've got diabetes and high blood pressure and rheumatic heart disease, you're going to birth under a tree. These women, who are midwives, doctors, social workers, psychologists, etc., are marrying the traditional ways of birthing with best of Western medicine so they can diagnose gestational diabetes, heart disease, all the things that these women need to have a healthy baby. And they are all across the country. There's one on Galwinku, there's one there's several. The Koori maternity service has been going for 18 years and 80% of Aboriginal women in Victoria are birthed under this program. And they are so poorly funded. They are not realised, they're not... Even one of the things I've just read, which just made me feel so wonderful, if you can't birth on country, at least you can put your placenta on country. And there is a placenta garden at Shepparton that was opened in 2008. So even if your child then gets taken away, which happens still too much, the placenta can be in the garden and you can go and visit the placenta. So the evidence for Aboriginal birthing is actually now coming out. So in addition to putting up these centres and running these programs, there's been a randomised controlled trial. That's like sort of the best evidence you can get. It's half the preterm birth rate with Aboriginal doulas. There's no excuse now. There's no excuse. If you really want to improve Aboriginal outcomes, you've got to do this way. And the last one I want to talk about is the youth justice issue. Sorry, I get a very dry mouth when I get emotional. And of course, there is this absolutely wonderful social reinvestment WA, which is done by a large number of Aboriginal organisations and Aboriginal groups like Wanjaning, like Derby Yerrigan, so on. Incredibly underfunded these people are. You know, look, the pathways go from birth through child protection, removal of Aboriginal children, 80% are not justified to be removed, and the pathway goes straight into juvenile justice. And once you're in juvenile justice, it's an absolute disaster for you. So this social reinvestment in Western Australia has been developed with pathways that all the way along acknowledge what could be done to divert these kids onto better pathways. It's a really good document if you wanted to read it. It's called Blueprint for the Future, and I commend it to you. And I just want to do one last example. I'm doing pretty well, really, which is another thing I didn't know a lot about until about 2016-17, and it's called Indigenous Data Sovereignty. Google it. And this is Aboriginal people, and I didn't know about it, and I'm doing Aboriginal data. Oh, I felt so ashamed. But anyway, went to this meeting in Melbourne. There's Marcia Langton and all these, Rye Devitt from ANU, wonderful people. And they gave example after example of when Aboriginal people are in control of the data that is collected and interpreted, analysed, and put out, it makes a huge difference to outcomes. And there are multiple examples, multiple examples. It's not just in health, it's in education, it's in health, but there's one in Burke. Now, many of you might have heard of Burke, a disastrous place, isn't it? Terrible, full of all the most ghastly things, kids running wild, etc. Well, they've had a reinvestment program in Burke. Indigenous data sovereignty took over. They measured the things that were important for them. They measured the pathways. And they started implementing things which stopped those kids running amok. This is another wonderful example. It's called the Maranguka Community Hub, if you want to look it up on the web. I always finish any talk I give with a quote from Dr. Yunupingu, who passed away earlier this year. And it's such a beautiful quote, I'm going to leave you with it. What Aboriginal people ask is that the modern world now makes the sacrifices necessary to give us a real future, to relax its grip on us, to let us breathe, to let us be free of the determined control exerted on us to make us like you. And you should take that a step further and recognise us for who we are, and not who you want us to be. Let us be who we are, Aboriginal people in a modern world, and be proud of us. Acknowledge that we have survived the worst that the past has thrown at us, and we are here with our songs, our ceremonies, our land, our language, and our people, our birthing, and our full identity. What a gift this is that we can give you if you choose to accept us in a meaningful way.